Hello, everyone. This is Tim, and I'm here, and I'm trying to put as much workout as I can. I've been organizing, trying to get all my ducks in a row so that I can do more classes for other platforms. I joined SuperProf so I can tutor. I'm trying to put more classes on Udemy. They take classes off if no one takes them. I had like 20 classes on there at one point, but I didn't get the support I should have, so they took some off. So what I'm going to be doing is reading. Some of you are just hearing me on a podcast, and I'm going to be reading, and I'll probably be taking breaks, and I'll just try to say break and back to reading so that people listening to me will know. I'm reading from Medical Apartheid this week. Every week I'll be reading from a different book, a different chapter. This week is Medical Apartheid. Next week is going to be Regulating the Poor. Okay, so I'm reading from chapter 12, Genetic Perdition, the Rise of Molecular Bias. All right, let's go. So it begins with a quote from Jonathan Beckwith. In the age of the technological fix, this country is heading for genetic and behavioral control of society. Who will exercise the control? Who will make the decisions about which genes are defective and which behavior abnormal? Who will make the decisions about the genetic worth of prospective human beings? That's Jonathan Beckwith, 1974. Quote, when I went to prison, the concern and worry literally broke my mother's heart. She suffered a series of heart attacks and strokes and died in 1997. She knew I was innocent because I had been at home with my parents when the crime occurred. And over the years, things just wore her down. When you are in prison, if you are close to your family, your whole family is in prison, end quote. The burden of guilt is common coin in prison, but Calvin Johnson knows the crushing agony of innocence. The 25-year-old Atlanta resident had a bright future, a close-knit family, many friends, and a wedding date when he was convicted of raping a white woman in 1983. It's rough. He had never seen his victim before, but he was convicted, although pubic hairs recovered from her body did not match his. They did come from an African American man, and that apparently was enough. I still had faith in the justice system. I believed it would be just a matter of time before officials realized that they had made a mistake. I was really kind of naive. I didn't believe that I would be sentenced or convicted of the crime's break. I don't know where these people come from. I have no faith in this system. Never have from a child. Because I knew what it was at 7, 8, 9 years old. When my mother was cleaning other women's houses that weren't better people than my mom, when she took me into white neighborhoods and their neighborhoods were always better than ours. Now, I knew even at that age, this is not right. There's something weird about this. So, if this guy was a grown man and had faith in the system as a black man, I don't know what black people, and black people are like, I don't know what delusion pills they're taking. I wish I had some though. This is crazy. Let's go back to the reading. Although the woman identified photographs of someone else as her assailant, and although he did not match key elements of her description, the actual rapist had only a mustache and Johnson wore a full beard. Johnson was convicted by an all-white jury. For 17 years, Johnson fought to survive in the hardest work camp in the state of Georgia. I worked in snake-infested swamp waters up to my knees. He also had to stave off assailants. When you're in prison for a sex offense, if you're not physically strong, the guys around you, they'll try to pick at you. So I lifted weights and became a pretty good size. People left me alone. Johnson lost his youth, his fiancée, and his naivete, but he says, I always believed that God would save me. Faith in God sustained his spirit, and in 1986, Johnson finally found physical deliverance in DNA, which proved him innocent. He was 42 years old. Nearly all human cells contain genes, which in turn contain, dioxyribonucleic acid. I know the word, it's just a hard time pronouncing. Acid or DNA. The molecule that encodes life itself. Okay. DNA's genetic code is composed of building blocks called nucleotides, and this code dictates and directs the development of a fertilized egg through process of protein manufacture so complex, that they remain incompletely understood. DNA is passed from parents to children, and it determines or influences many traits, from your eye color to many disease propensities. There is DNA in nearly all your cells, but there are several types of DNA, and less than 1% codes for differing traits such as eye color, height, or disease susceptibility. Unless you are an identical twin or the product of another such multiple birth, your DNA is unique. No one else on the planet has your exact genetic code, although humans share a great many genetic similarities. Today, DNA fingerprinting technology enables scientists to identify distinctive genetic patterns. The Johnson's case, the DNA samples from his body ultimately prove that the pubic hairs and other biological evidence left behind by the rapist were not his. At least 3 types of DNA fingerprinting are in use. But despite the terminology, none is as accurate an identification method as matching a fingerprint. The most popular method at the time of Johnson's conviction, restricted fragment length polymorphism, or RFLP, analysis, compares the DNA of 2 or more individuals, which varies by only 0.1%. That's one difference in 1,000, useful for establishing paternity or guilt. A newer form of DNA comparison utilizes single nucleotide polymorphism, SNP, has rapidly outstripped RFLP. Anyone who doubts the genetic technology can be an important blessing for African Americans should consider its pivotal role in freeing black men such as Calvin Johnson. Johnson was freed by the Innocent Project, the brainchild of O.J. Dream Team members Barry Scheck and Peter Neufeld, lawyers at the Cardozo School of Law in New York. This is another thing that burns me up. The NAACP is supposed to be for black people, colored people. It's an organization full of lawyers, and none of them are getting these innocent black men off. I don't understand it. I think I'm just losing my mind. Somebody's losing their mind. Maybe it's me. So far, DNA evidence has helped them, and the 15 to 20 similar projects they have inspired to exonerate more than 328 inmates, including Kirk Bloodsworth and Earl Washington Jr., who were sentenced to die in Maryland and Virginia, respectively. These are mostly African American men convicted of raping white women, says Neufeld. Only 10% of reported sex assaults are allegations of white women attacked by black men. Yet most 54% of all convictions proven to be unjust involve African American men wrongfully convicted of assaulting white women. This is a crime that seems associated with many wrong convictions. Again, got an organization full of lawyers. But again, the black women in my life get upset when I say this. Black men are the most tossed away, thrown away, forgotten human beings in this society. Especially if you're an old Jim Crow black. However, deployment. Okay, so many men have been freed by DNA testing that the laws ensuring prisoners' rights to DNA appeals have been passed in some states, including California, New York, and Illinois. Illinois declared a moratorium on capital punishment after an embarrassing string of investigations uncovered many innocent prisoners in its penal institutions. I remember when that happened, when the governor had to do that. Was that in the early 2000s or the 90s? I remember when it happened, though. However, deployment of DNA technology is no panacea. Relatively few inmates can afford the requisite $5,000, and backlash triggered by the Illinois' embarrassment was swift. Some cities, such as Lansing, Michigan, passed law restricting the use of DNA evidence in inmate appeals. Already they're stopping it. Then again, some criminals leave no testable material behind, and according to Barry Scheck, even when biological evidence exists, 70% of the time it is allowed to deteriorate, is lost, or is discarded during the decades an innocent person languishes in jail or break. Again, so they find out they're messing up. They find out there's this DNA evidence. All of a sudden, well, we can't use it. We're going to make sure it degrades so more black men can sit up in prison and die. Human error sometimes sabotages genetic wisdom, as when courts ignore compelling DNA evidence. Scientists and technicians in genetic laboratories have made errors and have even falsified DNA test results. For example, Chicago laboratory worker Pamela Fish lied or made errors that boasted at least one erroneous conviction, according to the forensic expert who reviewed her testimony before the release of inmate John Willis. Just lie on us. A study by University of Michigan law professor Samuel R. Gross determined that tens of thousands of innocent people are trapped in jail. If we reviewed all prison sentences with the same level of care that we devote to death sentences, there would have been more than 28,500 non-death row exonerations in the past 15 years, rather than the 255 that have in fact occurred. So that number is what he's estimating, 28,500. Might be more than that. Even for freedmen such as Johnson, justice remains elusive. How do you compensate a man for consigning him to spend his youth in hell, for the loss of his family, friends, income, and good name? States such as California offer the non-negotiable settlement of $100 for each day of unjust imprisonment, but 2/3 of those freed by DNA evidence get nothing. The money means nothing to some, such as Frank Lee Smith, a Fort Lauderdale man exonerated by DNA evidence nearly 15 years after he was sent to death row and 11 months after he died there of cancer. Clearly, DNA testing is no substitute for justice. In fact, according to experts such as Neufeld, the real significance is not that DNA got them out, but that DNA provides a window into the criminal justice system to see what went wrong with the system to let so many innocent people get convicted. Great. Nothing went wrong. That's just how it's supposed to work. As long as it's us rotting away in there. And I know we only make up half the prison population, but we only make up a very small percentage of the actual population of the society. But DNA evidence has powerful uses beyond liberating the innocent. So we go into the next section, Shades of Gattaca. The film Gattaca held a not too distant mirror up to a genetic dystopia in which human decisions and discretion are removed from all-encompassing judgments about men's worth. In this film, only one's DNA recognition and assessed by machines determines one's fate, leaving character, personality, drive, and intent all sublimated to the tyranny of the gene. The biometric dystopia of Gattaca doesn't exist yet, and perhaps it never will. But developments over the past few years evoke an unmistakable glimmer of recognition. The FBI, Secret Service, IRS, Social Security Department, Census Bureau, and Department of Veterans Affairs all maintain extensive collections of genetic data. Since May 1998, sex offenders have been required to surrender DNA samples to federal databases. And today, every state maintains its own DNA database that contains the DNA profiles of felons and others, including people merely suspected of crimes, or even of innocent people rounded up in DNA sweeps. The samples of 450,000 convicts are stored with identifiers such as the person's name, description, criminal record, social security number, and image. The government has also sponsored the creation of national databases, such as the FBI's Combined DNA Index System, CODIS, which stores DNA samples most without identifying formation. CODIS went online in 1998 with samples from 8,000 convicted child molesters, and by 2001, it contained the profiles of 1.5 million felons. So let me read that again. CODIS went online in 1998 with samples from 8,000 convicted child molesters, and by 2001, which is 3 years, it contained the profiles of 1.5 million felons. In 2002, the U.S. Attorney General ordered the FBI to expand CODIS to 50 million profiles. And by 2004, CODIS stored 2.6 million samples containing the DNA of people convicted of almost any crime. In October 2005, the Senate Judiciary Committee approved a law, which was pending when this book went to print, to force anyone who is merely detained by federal authorities to provide DNA. And in August 2006, the database contained more than 3.5 million samples. The FBI predicts that CODIS will accommodate 50 million samples in the near future. Some scientists warn that the very DNA evidence and technology that has freed hundreds of African American men like Johnson may soon be wielded by police to criminalize and convict Black and Hispanic men. From California to London, DNA data banking has allowed the collection of genetic evidence for convicted felons of the premise that those who have been convicted have sacrificed some of their rights to privacy. But Troy Duster, a professor of sociology at Berkeley and author of Backdoor to Eugenics, warned in 2001, quote, "The same technology that will exculpate people today is also being used to put people who have merely been stopped by the police into genetic databases." He is correct. In 2000, Miami police, seeking a violent criminal described vaguely as Black or Hispanic, stopped 2,300 Black and Hispanic men on the street and quickly took a buccal swab from each. Swabbing the interior of each man's cheek, the police now had samples of their DNA accompanied by identifying information, suspect profiles, and each man was free to go for the time being. The samples were tested against DNA left by the rapist at the scene, but none of these men's DNA matched that of the putative assailant. Therefore, all these men have demonstrated their innocence, but police have stored their genetic data in a database to be tapped when they next seek a perp. And they could use that and put your DNA in a spot and say it matches the DNA that they have on file. I don't trust them at all. This database of innocent Black and Hispanic men constitutes a collective presumption of guilt. When weighing the ethical and scientific unacceptability of this tactic, it is important to realize that 1. The term DNA fingerprinting is a misnomer. The genetic profile is not as specific as a fingerprint and cannot provide a unique identifier. 2. The description of a Black or a Hispanic suspect is so vague that it yields a racial dragnet, not a description of a suspect. And 3. Some rare differences that allow one to differentiate individuals based upon a genetic profile become less rare when one looks only within ethnic or kinship groups. So we're going to stop there for now, and tomorrow I'll continue to read. Yeah. Again, it's Medical Apartheid by Harriet A. Washington. And you know how to support me. Click the links, give directly, or become a sponsor. Until tomorrow, please take care and try to stay safe.